Welcome to the Psychology Undergrad.
Grab a seat at the table and just push those empty coffee cups out of the way.
Honestly, I think we're on cup number 4 at this point.
At least. But we are incredibly glad you could join us for this study session today.
Yeah, if you are looking around and wondering why we are currently barricaded behind a literal mountain of sociology and demography papers.
It's a hazard zone, really.
It is, but, well, you have come to the right place.
We are two extremely over-caffeinated undergrad psychology students.
And we are currently wading through the highly complex, heavily debated psychology of modern relationships.
Consider this your ultimate, deeply analytical study group.
We have our notes, our data sets, and a frankly intimidating stack of peer-reviewed journals.
Very intimidating. But we want you to really examine your own assumptions when it comes to relationship formation today.
Right. You might be prepping for a massive sociology exam right alongside us, or
perhaps you're just trying to map out the incredibly chaotic, shifting landscape of modern romance.
Either way, you are our third member today, and we are going to synthesize all this material together.
And the mission for this session is ambitious.
Very.
We are aiming to decode the evolving and sometimes downright confusing world of modern cohabitation and marriage.
We are synthesizing 4 very dense academic papers to answer some, fundamental questions about human behavior.
Like, does living together before you get married actually alter the trajectory of your relationship?
Or is marriage the ultimate physiological health booster that decades of sociology have basically claimed it is?
And how exactly does your socioeconomic status...
And your literal bank account.
Right, your bank account. How does that dictate whether you end up with a marriage license or a broken lease?
It is a massive amount of ground to cover today.
We're looking at global demographic shifts, the deeply personal psychological mechanics of moving in together,
the hard economics of union formation.
And we are going to dissect a rather intense academic debate about divorce statistics.
Because when you actually look at the methodology researchers use to track human behavior, you realize that a tiny mathematical error...
Oh, it's wild.
It can shape public policy and societal expectations for decades.
It really can. But before we get into the deep end of the data pool, I have to admit something.
What's that?
Pouring over 18 waves of Australian panel data, which is central to one of our papers today, is an exercise in pure endurance.
Oh my gosh, I know.
I was staring at these longitudinal spreadsheets, tracking variables on thousands of respondents, until my eyes essentially stopped focusing last night.
I saw you. You look like a zombie.
I was. Being an undergrad running through these massive data sets really drives home how critical cognitive recovery is.
Yeah, if we want our brains to actually absorb any of this psychology, we need proper sleep.
I did notice you were looking a bit sleep deprived when we started organizing the notes earlier, too.
Hey, I resent that, but it's true.
Which actually makes this the perfect moment to let our study buddy here know that this session is sponsored by Cozy Earth.
Oh, thank goodness for Cozy Earth.
Right. If there is one critical variable that can improve an exhausted student's baseline cognitive function, it is their bamboo sheet set.
It guarantees the best night's sleep. And honestly, the temperature regulation is a profound advantage when you are running on, caffeine and stress.
It genuinely is. Now, we are fully aware of the financial constraints here.
Yeah, you are likely an undergrad.
Luxury bamboo sheets usually require a budget that does not exactly align with a lifestyle funded by dining hall plans and part-time campus jobs.
But we are hooking you up.
We are. You can get a 21% discount to make these sheets accessible.
Just use the promo code PSYC101 at CozyEarth.com/discount PSYC101.
That is PSYC101 for 21% off.
I highly recommend factoring that into your recovery strategy for sure.
Definitely. But now that we have our parameters set, let's look at the roadmap for today's deep dive.
Let's do it.
We will start by examining the macro-level global landscape, focusing heavily on what demographers call the second demographic transition.
From there, we'll look at the micro level, exploring how cohabitation impacts physical and mental health.
After that, we will analyze the economic frameworks that dictate relationship stability.
Then we will break down the methodological flaws in the supposed cohabitation effect on divorce.
And finally, we'll explore the modern twists.
Like how serial cohabitation, shifting views on fertility, internet algorithms are fundamentally altering human pairing.
So let's start with that macro-level view.
We are pulling this foundational framework from a very comprehensive 2020 paper by Sassler and Lichter.
The central premise here is that marriage has been entirely dethroned.
Dethroned completely.
It is no longer the universally required first step of adulthood.
Historically, if we look back to the mid-20th century, reaching adulthood meant you finished your schooling, you got married, you moved out of your parents' house.
And then you started your career and had children.
Right. Marriage was the gateway institution.
But today, that sequence has totally fractured.
Sociologists classify this massive societal shift as the second demographic transition, or the SDT.
And to really understand the SDT, we have to briefly contextualize the first demographic transition.
Right, because you can't have a second without a first.
Exactly. The first demographic transition occurred as societies modernized and developed economically.
Moving from agrarian systems to industrial ones.
Yeah, and it was characterized by a massive historical shift from high mortality and high birth rates to low mortality and low birth rates.
Public health improved, infant mortality dropped, and families basically no longer needed to have 8 children just to ensure 3 survived to adulthood.
That was the first major reshaping of the human family.
But the second demographic transition, the SDT, is fundamentally different.
Because it's not primarily driven by public health or industrialization.
No, it is driven by individualism and shifting moral frameworks.
The SDT is characterized by a deliberate move away from traditional, uniform marriage and fertility models.
Toward highly individualized, fluid family structures.
It includes delayed marriage, the massive rise in premarital cohabitation,
The decoupling of marriage and childbearing.
and subreplacement fertility rates,
It is a shift from the family as a strict economic and reproductive unit.
to the family as a vehicle for individual self-actualization.
And to keep our notes organized as we sift through this, it's really helpful to use a simple mnemonic.
We love a good mnemonic.
Always. When we see SDT in the literature, we often use the shorthand shifting dating trends.
Shifting dating trends, that's good.
Yeah, just to immediately recall that this transition is all about societies moving from rigid traditional marriage pathways to a broad, flexible menu of cohabitation and union options.
Shifting dating trends. It is a great way to anchor the concept when you are deep in demographic tables.
Definitely. But what Sassler and Lichter make abundantly clear is that this transition is absolutely not uniform.
Not at all. The SDT does not look the same in New York as it does in Oslo or as it does in Tokyo.
The way cohabitation is legally treated, socially viewed, and practically executed varies wildly.
Depending on the dominant religious and moral frameworks of a given region.
And surprisingly, the United States is actually a massive international outlier in how it handles these shifting trends.
It really is. When we analyze cohabitation in the United States, the defining characteristic is volatility.
Total volatility. The median duration of a premarital cohabitation in the U.S. is surprisingly short.
Often under 2 years.
Couples move in together rapidly, and they either break up or transition into marriage quite quickly.
Furthermore, in the U.S., cohabitation is heavily stratified by social class and educational attainment.
It operates largely as a temporary state, a testing ground,
Or in many cases for lower-income individuals, an economic necessity born of high housing costs.
Right. But contrast that with the European manifestation of the SDT.
Specifically in the Nordic countries like Sweden, Norway, and Denmark.
In those societies, cohabitation is not a temporary stepping stone.
It is an alternative, permanent institution.
In the eyes of the law, the tax code, and societal morality, long-term cohabitants and legally married couples are treated essentially identically.
A couple in Sweden might move in together, buy a house, have 3 children, and live their entire lives without ever signing a marriage certificate.
And society does not view their commitment as somehow lesser or incomplete.
And that profound cultural difference dictates how sociologists actually study these populations.
Because European countries have entirely normalized non-marital cohabitation, they have developed seamless population registers to track it.
In places like Norway or Belgium, the government maintains dynamic, centralized population databases.
When an individual moves to a new address and registers their domicile alongside a romantic partner, the demographic data updates automatically.
Researchers have an incredibly clear, real-time picture of complex family structures.
The duration of cohabitations and the exact timing of life events like childbirth within those unions.
Which makes the American methodology look absolutely archaic by comparison.
Oh, I found this part of the reading so illuminating regarding how data collection shapes our understanding of reality.
Because the U.S. historically viewed cohabitation as an informal, somewhat stigmatized arrangement, We never built a system to track it efficiently.
No, the U.S. Census Bureau still relies heavily on the household roster method.
Every 10 years, or via the American Community Survey, they send out a form and essentially ask one person, the householder, to list the relationship of everyone else living in the home to them.
It is a cross-sectional snapshot, not a dynamic register.
And the categories have historically been extremely clunky.
Seriously, it wasn't until 1990 that the census even included an unmarried partner category.
Before that, cohabiting partners were often just classified as roommates or boarders.
Completely masking the romantic and economic reality of the household.
And even today, because the census is just a snapshot, it entirely misses short-term cohabitations that begin and end between survey periods.
It highlights a massive cultural lag.
The U.S. government is still struggling to accurately measure what constitutes a modern family because the institutional framework was built around the assumption of traditional marriage.
But then, if we pan the camera over to East Asia countries like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan, we see a completely different, almost stalled manifestation of the SDT.
In these societies, non-marital cohabitation remains highly stigmatized.
It is deeply entangled with traditional moral and religious frameworks that prioritize legal marriage, filial piety, and very defined essentialist gender roles.
Essentialist being the key sociological term here.
Right.
These are policies and cultural norms built on the essentialist belief that men are inherently suited to be primary breadwinners.
And women are inherently suited to be primary caregivers and manage the domestic sphere.
In East Asian countries, the social welfare systems and corporate cultures are largely structured around this male breadwinner model.
And because the moral framework strongly discourages living together outside of marriage, and because traditional marriage demands these rigid gender roles, highly educated women in these countries find themselves in a massive bind.
If a woman in Japan has a university degree and a flourishing career, entering into a traditional marriage often means an implicit expectation that she will eventually abandon her career.
Just to manage the household and children?
With very little domestic help from her husband, due to punishing corporate work hours.
So what is the behavioral outcome?
We see a massive retreat from union formation altogether.
Without the socially acceptable pressure release valve of non-marital cohabitation that Western countries have, people are simply opting out.
Sassler and Lichter highlight a staggering statistic.
What was it again?
By 2015, only 74.1% of Japanese men aged 45 to 49 had ever married.
That means over a quarter of men in their late 40s have never been married.
That is a demographic earthquake.
When the religious and moral strictures around traditional marriage remain entirely rigid, but the economic reality and educational attainment of women progress, the system just gridlocks.
Exactly. In Scandinavia, the SDT means everyone lives together without marrying.
In the U.S., the SDT means people live together briefly, with class heavily dictating who eventually marries.
And in Japan, the SDT manifests as a massive increase in lifelong singlehood.
It perfectly illustrates that human behavior cannot be studied in a vacuum.
It is always constrained by the macro-level policy and moral architecture of the society.
But this global perspective naturally leads us to a more intimate question.
If we drill down from the societal trends to the individual, what is actually happening psychologically and physiologically when two people decide to merge their lives and share a household?
Which transitions us perfectly into our second major area of focus.
Health, happiness, and the psychology of the intention to marry.
For this, we're looking closely at a fascinating 2025 study by Hewitt and Vidal.
And this is the paper that utilizes that massive longitudinal data set we mentioned earlier.
The Household Income and Labor Dynamics in Australia Survey, or HILDA.
The HILDA dataset is essentially the gold standard for this kind of sociological inquiry.
They didn't just take a cross-sectional snapshot.
No, they tracked 2,820 respondents over 18 separate waves.
Meaning they went back to the exact same individuals year after year for almost 2 decades.
They meticulously tracked their relationship transitions, their general health, their mental health, and their self-reported life satisfaction.
Having 18 years of continuous data on the exact same people allows researchers to tackle one of the oldest debates in family sociology.
For decades, the literature has championed the idea of a marriage premium.
The overarching narrative, heavily influenced by traditional moral frameworks, was that the institution of marriage itself makes people healthier, happier, and longer lived.
But there has always been a massive methodological blind spot.
The confounding variables of causation versus selection.
This is a critical distinction that we need to unpack thoroughly.
The causation hypothesis argues that the legal and social institution of marriage actively produces health benefits.
The mechanism here is social control and support,
When you are married, you have a partner monitoring your behavior.
telling you to stop smoking, encouraging you to go to the doctor, sharing the financial burden of healthcare.
And providing a stable psychological baseline that lowers chronic stress cortisol levels.
The institution causes the health.
But the selection hypothesis looks at the data from the opposite direction.
It argues that marriage does not magically cure depression or physical ailments.
Instead, the marriage market is highly competitive.
People who are already physically healthy, psychologically stable, and economically secure are simply much more likely to be selected into marriage.
If an individual is battling severe chronic illness, extreme poverty, or unmanaged mental health issues, the barriers to finding a partner and maintaining a relationship long enough to reach the altar are significantly higher.
Therefore, married people appear healthier in the data, not because marriage healed them.
But because only the healthy manage to get married.
Exactly. And previous studies attempting to untangle this often fell into a trap of crude categorization.
They would group all legally married people into one bucket and all unmarried, cohabiting people into another bucket and simply compare the averages.
But Hugh and Vidal recognized that cohabitation in the modern era is not a monolith.
People share apartments for vastly different psychological reasons.
This is where the study gets brilliant.
They split the cohabiting respondents into two distinct psychological categories.
Those who reported an intention to marry their current partner and those who reported no intention to marry.
And to understand why that subjective intention radically alters a person's physical and mental health data, we have to look at the psychological concept of commitment theory.
Commitment theory separates our bonds into two distinct forces.
Constraint commitment and interpersonal commitment.
Constraint commitment represents the structural, logistical, and financial barriers to leaving a relationship.
It is the shared lease on the apartment.
It's the joint bank account.
It's the dog you adopted together.
It is the sheer, exhausting administrative nightmare of disentangling two lives.
You might be deeply unhappy, but the constraints keep you in the household.
It's the fear of having to break a lease and figure out who gets the good espresso machine.
Exactly. That is constraint.
Interpersonal commitment, on the other hand, is the internal psychological dedication to the partnership.
It is the explicit desire for the relationship to persist into the future.
The emotional investment in the other person's well-being.
And the viewing of yourselves as a cohesive, long-term unit.
What Hewitt and Vidal hypothesized, and what the Hilda data confirmed, is that cohabitors who explicitly intend to marry their partners exhibit the same high levels of interpersonal commitment as people who are already legally married.
And it is that high interpersonal commitment, not the legal constraints of a marriage certificate, that actually drives the physiological and psychological benefits we use to attribute solely to marriage.
Let's look at the specific numbers, because the gender dynamics they uncovered are genuinely surprising.
Hilda measures self-reported life satisfaction on a scale from 0 to 10.
If you look at the traditional causation model, you would assume women's life satisfaction hits its absolute zenith after the wedding day.
But the data shows something else entirely.
For women, the absolute peak of life satisfaction, averaging a 7.89 out of 10, occurs during the period when they are cohabiting and likely to marry.
And crucially, once they actually transition into legal marriage, that life satisfaction score does not go up.
It actually experiences a slight statistically significant drop to 7.74.
So the peak psychological state for a woman is the anticipation phase.
But why? If interpersonal commitment remains high, why does the formalization of the union lead to a decrease in satisfaction?
Sociologists attribute this to the lingering power of traditional gender expectations and the sudden influx of invisible labor.
Even in highly progressive egalitarian couples who split chores evenly while cohabiting, the act of entering into a legal marriage often unconsciously activates deeply ingrained societal scripts.
Studies consistently show that post-wedding, the burden of invisible household management, keeping track of social calendars, managing the mental load of grocery lists, organizing holiday gatherings, shifts disproportionately onto the wife.
Right. During the cohabiting with intent to marry phase, a woman experiences all the psychological security and emotional highs of future planning.
Without having yet assumed the institutional baggage and the heavier domestic burden that society still assigns to the role of wife.
It is a window where the relationship is highly secure but still defined largely by the couple's own rule.
Rather than society's historical rules.
Now, if we look at the men in the Hilda study, the trajectory is markedly different.
Men do not experience a drop in well-being upon marriage.
In fact, for men, transitioning directly from cohabitation into marriage provides a significant measurable boost to their general physical health.
And this ties back to the social control theory we mentioned earlier.
Men, on average, are more likely to engage in risk-taking behaviors
Possess poorer dietary habits.
and delay seeking medical attention when single.
Entering into a formal marriage often introduces a partner who actively manages the household health.
Scheduling the doctor's appointments, improving the nutritional baseline of meals, and discouraging reckless behavior.
Men essentially outsource a portion of their health management to their wives, which results in a tangible increase in their physical longevity.
So the synthesis of the Hewitt and Vedel paper is profound.
Intentions dictate reality.
Cohabiting with a clear, shared intention to build a permanent future provides health and happiness outcomes that rival, and in some metrics, exceed legal marriage.
It forces us to discard the antiquated notion that a marriage certificate possesses inherent healing properties.
It is the psychological safety of interpersonal commitment that acts as the buffer against the stresses of the world.
But if having a shared intention to marry is the key to unlocking these psychological and health benefits, we have to ask the obvious follow-up question.
What exactly determines whether a cohabiting couple develops that intention or whether they just drift along until the lease expires?
Why do some couples look at each other and decide to plan a forever, while others remain perpetually uncommitted?
To answer that, we have to look at the literal bottom line,
Which brings us to the third major segment of our analysis.
the economics of love.
We are moving from the psychology of intention to the hard material realities of household finance.
For this, we rely heavily on an outstanding 2018 study by Patrick Ishizuka, published in the journal Demography.
Ishizuka utilized a different massive data set, the Survey of Income and Program Participation, or SIPP.
SIPP data is incredible because it doesn't just ask about income in broad strokes.
No, it tracks exact household earnings, wealth accumulation, and participation in government assistance programs over time.
Mapping all of that against relationship transitions.
And the baseline reality that Ishizuka maps out is one of extreme volatility.
As we established, the median duration of a cohabiting union in the U.S. is very short.
If you look at a cohort of cohabiting couples, within 3 years, roughly 40% will level up and transition into marriage.
However, a massive 27% will completely separate and dissolve the household.
The remaining minority just continue cohabiting.
So what separates the 40% who marry from the 27% who break up?
It almost entirely comes down to how they handle their money.
To navigate the various sociological theories regarding money and relationships, we use another structural mnemonic in our notes.
SEFM, seriously evaluating financial matters.
SEFM stands for the 4 dominant economic theories.
Specialization, economic dependence, family stress, and the marriage bar.
Let's dissect these sequentially, starting with the S, specialization.
This theory is deeply rooted in the historical economic framework proposed by Gary Becker in 1981.
Becker viewed the family as a microeconomy.
He argued that couples achieve maximum stability and efficiency through gains to trade.
Just like in international trade, a household maximizes its output if one partner specializes entirely in market labor making money.
And the other partner specializes entirely in domestic labor managing the home and children.
This, of course, formed the economic justification for the male breadwinner norm.
In the mid-20th century, this model was highly stable.
But why was it stable? It wasn't just because of economic efficiency.
No, it was heavily reinforced by the legal and religious architecture of traditional marriage.
If a woman in 1960 quit her job to specialize in domestic labor, she was taking an economic risk.
But that risk was mitigated by the near impossibility of divorce and the heavy social stigma against men abandoning their families.
But Ishizuka's analysis of SIPP data reveals that the specialization theory completely falls apart when applied to modern cohabiting couples.
It is a spectacular failure.
Why? Because cohabitation operates entirely outside that historical architecture.
If you are an unmarried cohabiter and you agree to specialize in domestic labor while your partner builds their career, you are engaging in an act of profound, almost reckless financial vulnerability.
Exactly. If the relationship dissolves after 5 years, You have no legal claim to alimony.
You likely have no legal right to the assets accumulated in your partner's name.
And you now have a massive 5-year gap on your resume that severely damages your future earning potential.
Because cohabitation lacks the institutional safety nets of marriage, specialization does not create stability,
It creates deep psychological anxiety,
which logically leads us to the E in our framework.
economic dependence.
Some sociologists hypothesize that while specialization might cause anxiety, extreme economic dependence might still prevent breakups.
The theory posits that if there's a massive disparity in earnings, say one partner earns $150,000 and the other earns $20,000, the relationship will not dissolve simply because the lower earner literally cannot afford to move out.
They are financially trapped.
But again, Ishizuka found the data contradicts this.
While economic dependence might delay a breakup in the short term while someone saves up for a security deposit, it fundamentally corrodes the interpersonal commitment.
Unequal earnings often lead to severe power imbalances, where the higher earner dictates the terms of the relationship, leading to resentment and eventual dissolution.
So if specialization and economic dependence fail, what economic conditions actually foster stability?
This brings us to the the family stress model.
This model is straightforward but empirically robust.
Low overall household income equals high chronic stress.
The constant cognitive burden of navigating utility bills, rent increases, and unexpected medical expenses creates an environment of perpetual friction.
The lack of material resources acts as an accelerant for any minor interpersonal conflict, frequently leading to a breakup.
But the most fascinating finding from Ishizuka isn't just that poverty causes stress.
It is his discovery regarding what creates the ultimate glue for a cohabiting couple.
When looking at the SIPP data, the single greatest predictor of relationship stability, meaning the couple does not break up, is earnings equality.
This is a profound shift from the Becker model of the 1980s.
Couples who earn roughly similar amounts of money are significantly more likely to stay together.
Why? Because earnings equality fundamentally alters the psychological architecture of the partnership
It moves the relationship away from a dynamic of bargaining and power asymmetry.
and moves it toward true egalitarian cooperation.
When both partners contribute equally to the household economy, neither feels exploited and neither feels trapped.
They are pooling their resources not out of desperate dependency, but out of mutual benefit.
Egalitarianism, it turns out, isn't just a progressive moral ideal,
It is an incredibly effective structural adhesive for unmarried couples.
but maintaining stability and avoiding a breakup is only half the equation.
What actually pushes an egalitarian, stable, cohabiting couple to make the transition to legal marriage?
That brings us to the M in SEFM, the marriage bar.
This is the theory that the data supports with overwhelming force.
The marriage bar theory posits that couples in the modern era hold themselves to a perceived societal standard of middle-class wealth that they feel they must achieve before they are morally and financially ready for marriage.
We often use the analogy of a video game.
The marriage bar is essentially an achievement lock.
The game will not let you progress to the next level marriage until you have gathered enough resources to pass the toll booth.
But let me push back on this for a second, because a listener might be thinking, wait a minute, my grandparents got married in 1955. They were 20 years old, they had absolutely zero savings, they rented a tiny apartment, and they built their wealth together after the wedding. Why didn't they face a marriage bar?
That is the crucial historical distinction. What your grandparents engaged in was companionate marriage.
In the mid-20th century, marriage was the foundation.
You got married first, and the marriage was the vehicle through which you achieved adulthood and eventually built wealth.
But due to the second demographic transition, the massive increase in the cost of living, and the rise of income inequality, the paradigm has flipped.
We have moved from companionate marriage to capstone marriage.
Capstone marriage, meaning the wedding is the final brick you put on top of the structure once it is already built.
Couples today feel that to enter marriage legitimately, they need a specific income ratio.
They need to have paid down their student loans.
They need substantial savings.
And ideally, they need a down payment for a house.
The SIPP data shows clearly, as the cohabiting couple's combined wealth and income cross a specific threshold, their probability of marrying skyrockets.
And the sociological implications of this are quite grim.
If couples are holding themselves to a financial marriage bar and real wages has stagnated while housing costs have exploded, it means that marriage is rapidly transforming into a luxury good.
A luxury good. It is no longer a universal adult experience.
It is an exclusive institutional status largely reserved for the socioeconomically advantaged.
Those with college degrees and high earning potential pool their egalitarian incomes, clear the marriage bar, and get married.
Those without college degrees, struggling in low-wage sectors, get trapped below the marriage bar.
They may cohabit, they may have children together, but they lack the financial stability to pass the toll booth.
Leaving them highly vulnerable to the family stress model we discussed earlier.
It creates a bifurcated society where family stability is directly downstream of economic inequality.
But let us construct a hypothetical.
Let's say a couple manages to navigate this successfully.
They achieve earnings equality, they build their savings, they clear the marriage bar, and they transition from cohabiting into a legal marriage.
They made it. But wait, are they actually safe?
Or the very act of living together for 3 years before the wedding statistically doom their marriage to failure.
This brings us to our fourth major topic, which is an intense methodological teardown within the academic community.
We are looking at a 2021 paper by Manning, Smock, and Rowley, which was written as a direct, blistering rebuttal to a 2019 paper by Rosenfeld and Rosler.
In the realm of sociology, this is as close as researchers get to a cage match.
It really is. It revolves around a concept known as the cohabitation effect.
To understand the stakes, we need to trace the history of this debate back to the 1980s.
Back when cohabitation first started rising, many psychologists logically assumed it would be highly beneficial for marital stability.
They proposed the weeding hypothesis.
The theory was simple. Living together acts as a test drive.
You move in, and you quickly discover if your partner refuses to contribute to household chores, has terrible financial habits, or possesses incompatible sleep schedules.
You weed out the bad matches by breaking up, meaning only the highly compatible couples survive to get married.
Therefore, premarital cohabitation should logically lead to much lower divorce rates.
It made intuitive sense.
But when the long-term data from the 1980s and 1990s started coming in, it revealed the exact opposite.
Researchers were stunned to find that couples who lived together before marriage actually had a significantly higher risk of divorce compared to those who moved in together after the wedding.
They dubbed this the cohabitation effect.
It was a massive paradox. How could testing a relationship make it more fragile?
But eventually, sociologists cracked the code by recognizing the selection effect, which we touched on earlier regarding health.
But here, the selection effect was driven by morality and religion, not just physical fitness.
We have to place ourselves in the cultural context of the 1970s and 1980s.
Living together out of wedlock, living in sin, carried a massive societal, moral, and religious stigma.
It was highly frowned upon by mainstream institutions.
Therefore, the people who chose to cohabit during that era were a very specific self-selected group.
They were inherently unconventional.
They were less religious, less bound by traditional social norms, and placed a higher value on individualism over institutional loyalty.
And crucially, those exact same psychological traits, being less religious, less traditional, and more individualistic, also made them significantly more willing to break the rules of traditional marriage and file for divorce if the relationship became unfulfilling.
It was a massive confounding variable.
It wasn't the act of sharing an apartment that magically caused the divorce.
It was the type of person willing to break societal norms to share the apartment in the first place.
Precisely. The correlation was not causation.
And the logical extension of the selection effect theory is that as cohabitation becomes entirely normalized and the societal stigma vanishes, the cohabitation effect on divorce should also vanish.
Because you are no longer selecting for unconventional risk takers.
You're just selecting for the general population.
And the consensus in the sociological community for the last decade was exactly that.
The cohabitation effect is dead.
It was a historical artifact of a stigmatized era.
But then in 2019, Rosenfeld and Rosler published a highly publicized paper claiming that the consensus was wrong.
They claimed they ran the numbers on recent data and found that the divorce curse was still real.
They argued that even today, living together first intrinsically raises your risk of divorce.
Which is when Manning, Smock, and Rowley stepped in, reviewed Rosenfeld's methodology, and basically said, your math is fundamentally flawed.
This is the methodological deep dive we promised.
It all centers on a statistical trap known as an age period cohort error, or an APC error.
Let's really break down the mechanics of this error because it is fascinating how easy it is to misinterpret data.
Both sets of researchers were using data from the National Survey of Family Growth, the NSFG.
The NSFG is a vital data set, but it has a very specific hard limitation.
They only interview respondents up to age 44.
When you turn 45, you age out of the survey entirely.
Now think about the mathematical implications of that age truncation.
Rosenfeld and Rosler were using survey data collected across various years, and they were looking back historically at marriages that occurred in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s.
But if you are analyzing a data set in the year 1995, and you are trying to study the divorce outcomes of couples who got married 20 years earlier in 1975, you run into a massive wall.
Let's use a tangible thought experiment. I want to study how long 20-year marriages last.
I open up the 1995 NSFG dataset, and I look for couples who got married in 1975.
But remember, the survey rules dictate that no one in my dataset can be older than 44.
So if I am looking at someone in 1995 who has been married for 20 years, and they cannot be older than 44 today, it means they had to be a maximum of 24 when they got married.
And likely to get a decent sample size, I'm pulling in people who are currently 38 or 39, meaning they got married at 18 or 19.
That is the exact mathematical trap Rosenfeld fell into.
Because they failed to account for the age truncation of the dataset, when they tried to look back at historical marriage cohorts, their sample was severely biased.
They were artificially filtering their data, so they were overwhelmingly looking at people who got married extremely young.
And why does that completely destroy their conclusion?
Because age at marriage is one of the single most powerful predictors of divorce.
Getting married in your teens or very early 20s carries a massive risk of divorce, completely independent of whether you live together first.
The human brain isn't even fully developed until 25.
Trying to select a lifelong partner at 19 is statistically perilous.
Rosenfeld's team confounded calendar year of the survey with actual marriage cohort, completely skewing the results by unintentionally focusing on high-risk teen marriages.
So Manning and her team took the exact same NSFG data, but they ran the models correctly.
They adjusted for actual marriage cohorts, meaning they grouped people strictly by the era they actually got married in.
Ensuring they weren't artificially filtering for teenage brides and grooms.
And what was their ultimate conclusion?
It was a definitive, mathematically sound debunking.
When you look at couples who formed their marriages after 1996, the era where cohabitation became the statistical norm rather than the exception, premarital cohabitation has absolutely zero negative effect on marital stability.
None. The risk of divorce is identical to couples who moved in together after the wedding.
It is a brilliant demonstration of how critical rigorous methodology is.
It proves that how we measure time, how we define our cohorts, and how we account for the limitations of our data sets fundamentally alters our understanding of human behavior.
The stigma is gone, the selection effect is gone, and the divorce curse is officially a mathematical ghost story.
Which is incredibly reassuring. It means the 70% of modern couples who live together before marriage are not accidentally sabotaging their futures.
But with the divorce myth dismantled, we have to look at how these normalized, destigmatized, cohabiting couples are fundamentally reshaping the timeline of the human family.
This brings us to our fifth and final section, modern twists.
We are returning to the overarching framework of the second demographic transition provided by Sassler and Lichter to explore the complex secondary effects of this sociological shift.
The first major modern twist is the sheer prevalence of serial cohabitation.
Serial cohabitation is a relatively new demographic phenomenon.
It is not just the act of living with someone before you marry them.
It is the act of establishing and then dismantling multiple shared households with different romantic partners over the course of your life, usually in your 20s and 30s.
And the psychological toll of serial cohabitation is something sociologists are just beginning to measure.
Think about the constraint commitment we discussed earlier.
Breaking a lease, separating finances, and dividing shared possessions is exhausting.
If an individual goes through that process 2 or 3 times before the age of 30, their psychological threshold for what constitutes a permanent commitment fundamentally changes.
I would imagine it breeds a deep sense of caution.
If you have moved couches and divided up bookshelves 3 times, you might approach your 4th cohabitation with a heightened sense of self-preservation.
You might maintain separate bank accounts longer, or view co-residence not as an inevitable escalator to marriage, but as a fluid, inherently temporary state of being.
The architecture of the SDT allows for this flexibility, but the emotional transaction costs are high.
Another profound twist resulting from the SDT is the complete uncoupling of marriage and fertility.
For centuries, across almost all moral and religious frameworks, Sexual reproduction and the institution of marriage were inextricably linked.
If an unmarried couple experienced an unplanned pregnancy, there was immense, crushing societal pressure to rush to the altar to legitimize the child.
The classic shotgun marriage.
The moral imperative was that a child must be born within the bounds of legal wedlock.
But as the SDT progressed and individualism began to override traditional religious dictates, that framework collapsed.
Today, the data reveals a stunning shift.
In the United States, roughly 60% of all non-marital births do not occur to single mothers.
They occur to women who are actively cohabiting with the child's father.
That statistic represents a monumental shift in societal norms.
It means that when an unplanned pregnancy occurs today, society no longer strictly demands a rush to the altar.
The moral responsibility has shifted from formalizing the institution to simply providing a shared household for the child.
We have replaced the shotgun marriage with shotgun cohabitation.
A couple might discover they are pregnant, and their immediate response is to sign a lease together so they can co-parent.
But crucially, they do not feel the moral imperative to go to the courthouse and sign a marriage license.
Why? Because, as we discussed with the SEFM model, they haven't cleared the financial marriage bar.
They feel morally obligated to raise the child together, but they do not feel financially worthy of claiming the luxury status of marriage.
They are separating the functional act of parenting from the institutional capstone of wedlock.
It is a highly rational economic response to a shifting moral landscape.
But perhaps the most invisible, yet most impactful modern twist is how the SDT is altering the very mechanics of how we select these partners in the first place.
We are witnessing a massive shift in assortative mating.
Let's define that. Assortative mating is the sociological term for how individuals choose partners who are similar to themselves in terms of phenotype, social class, or educational attainment.
For essentially all of recorded history, the dominant pattern was female hypergamy.
Hypergamy meaning marrying up.
Because women were historically barred from higher education and locked out of the lucrative sectors of the workforce, their primary avenue for social mobility and economic security was to marry a man of higher socioeconomic status.
A woman's physical attractiveness and domestic skills were essentially traded for a man's economic resources.
But the late 20th century shattered that model.
Women gained massive, unprecedented access to higher education.
In fact, they didn't just gain access, they overtook men.
Today, women enroll in and graduate from universities at significantly higher rates than men.
And this creates a fascinating mathematical problem for hypergamy.
The math simply no longer works.
If the majority of college graduates are women, there are physically not enough highly educated, high-earning men for all of these women to marry up.
The pool of available hypergamous partners has shrunk drastically.
So what happens? We see the death of female hypergamy.
Women are adapting by casting a wider net.
Highly educated, high-earning women are increasingly partnering with men who have lower educational attainment or lower socioeconomic status than they do.
And this fundamentally alters the power dynamics within the home.
When the woman is the primary earner, it forces the couple toward that egalitarian model that Ishizuka noted was so vital for keeping cohabiting couples stable.
However, the shift in assortative mating is not just about women casting wider nets.
We also have to account for the massive technological variable that has been introduced in the last 2 decades.
The internet.
Yes, technology is throwing a massive wrench into the sociological models.
We are no longer relying on serendipity, church socials, or workplace proximity to meet partners.
We have the rise of hyper-specific, algorithmically driven internet dating.
Think about the platforms that dominate the market. Farmers Only, Elite Singles, The League, or even the underlying invisible ELO rating systems of Tinder and Hinge.
We are outsourcing the initial filtering of our mating pool to proprietary algorithms.
And we have to ask a critical question. What exactly are those algorithms optimizing for?
By and large, they are designed to match people based on shared backgrounds, identical educational levels, and similar income brackets.
They are essentially mechanizing assortative mating.
Think about the implications of this regarding the marriage bar.
If the algorithm only shows you profiles of people who perfectly match your socioeconomic status, it is silently and visibly enforcing the financial prerequisites of marriage before 2 people even go on a first date.
It is a profound acceleration of demographic sorting.
If you are highly educated and wealthy, the algorithm ensures you only meet other highly educated, wealthy individuals.
You match, you pool your equal incomes, you easily clear the marriage bar, and you consolidate that wealth through marriage.
Conversely, if you are economically disadvantaged, the algorithm groups you with others facing similar struggles, making it statistically much harder for either of you to ever clear that financial toll booth.
The internet is actively widening the demographic divide in family stability.
It is algorithmic redlining applied to human romance.
And that realization brings us to the natural conclusion of our deep dive.
We have covered a massive amount of sociological and demographic terrain today.
Let's do a quick synthesis to ensure our notes are fully organized.
First, we established that the second demographic transition has permanently altered global norms, moving us away from traditional marriage toward fluid family structures, though the U.S. remains an outlier with its volatile, class-divided cohabitations.
Second, we looked at the Hilda data to prove that interpersonal intentions matter far more than legal certificates. Women hit peak life satisfaction when cohabiting with a clear intent to marry, avoiding the invisible labor trap of traditional wifehood, while men receive a tangible physical health boost upon formalizing the union.
Third, we decoded the economics of love using SIPP data. The old models of specialization have failed. Today, equal bank accounts create the highest relationship stability, while clearing the perceived middle-class marriage bar is the absolute prerequisite for transitioning from an apartment lease to a wedding ring.
Fourth, we walk through the intense academic debate over the cohabitation effect, proving that age period cohort errors and age truncation bias in the NSFG dataset artificially inflated divorce statistics by focusing on teen marriages. The myth that living together causes divorce is mathematically dead.
And finally, we explored how serial cohabitation, shotgun cohabitation, the mathematical death of female hypergamy, and algorithmic dating platforms are creating a highly complex, financially segregated mating market.
It is a lot to process.
But as we close out this study session, we want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over.
Something that builds on the economic realities and algorithmic sorting we just discussed.
If the marriage bar proves that legal marriage is essentially transforming into a luxury good, and if our internet algorithms are perfectly, silently matching us exclusively by socioeconomic status,
Are we rapidly moving toward a future where the institution of legal marriage has nothing to do with romance, love, or even child rearing?
is marriage ceasing to be an expression of the human heart and instead becoming simply a formalized financial merger?
A wealth consolidation tool only accessible to the educated elite.
And if the legal institution of marriage becomes a gated community, what does that mean for the fundamental psychology of romance, commitment, and family building for the rest of society?
Are we just replacing the old religious gatekeepers of love with new algorithmic and financial gatekeepers?
It forces us to question whether our most intimate, private choices are actually just highly predictable responses to macroeconomic pressures.
It is certainly a question that warrants further analysis.
It is a mind bender, and definitely something to keep you up at night as you ponder the sociological future of human connection.
Keep studying the data, keep questioning the behavioral norms, and thank you so much for joining our study session today.
Your perspective at this table is always valued.
And if you are going to be kept up at night pondering whether your dating app is secretly enforcing socioeconomic segregation, you might as well do it in an optimal recovery environment.
Absolutely. Do not forget to utilize that promo code PSYC101 at CozyEarth.com, Fazoshan of discount PSYC101 for 21% off those Cozy Earth bamboo sheets.
Protect your sleep, protect your cognitive baseline, and we will see you back here for the next deep dive.